or for just being part of my free community there called a Cyber Guild, and we have fun now and then with some free lectures and other resources. HERMETICpodcast.com is my podcast, and you can go there, and there's Patreon, and YouTube memberships has blown up the past few months, and so I've got a lot of stuff there for members that is not available elsewhere. And we have a good time on the new Discord I made due to demand at last after many years, boomer style. And I don't know how it works, which apparently people find even more adorable. So I've shared some unique stuff there as well. But most importantly, I am hosting two major events this year through the Arcane Research Society, which I founded back in 2019 and did a world tour, by world, of course, we mean Europe and America, starting in Canada. And you can go to arcaneresearchsociety.com/2026 for our this year's events, or anokiacon.com, which is the conference we'll have in Austin, Texas, November 6th through 8th. Our spring workshop has just been, I'm waiting for the final call right now to confirm it, in Austin on June 13th. And as soon as I do, I'll release our video promo for that. And that will be an all-day workshop in we have a great venue downtown Austin that we have the run of. And the workshop will feature three 3-hour workshops, one by myself on what I'm on the topic of today. And I'll say more about that, of course, throughout the hour or whatever. And the other two workshop presenters, I don't know what their topics will be yet for their workshops, but they're both renowned presenters and authors. So those people are Jason Louv and fellow Austin native Craig Williams, who is incredibly a remarkable author, very prolific, and a wonderful guy. So there'll be the three of us there this June for our spring workshop. And you can access both those events online or in person by getting an annual membership at arcaneresearchsociety.com. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man. No, thank you so much. I'm glad to get you back on, regardless what the topic was. All right. So, I mean, I guess to get into it, I mean, what would you say, for listeners who have heard the word but don't really know what it even means? What is like the clearest way to even define the Qliphoth? Or
literally as shells or husks, and the visualizations that you would naturally have go along with that term are very appropriate, right? The pearl in the oyster, the sephira in the oyster, in the husk, in the Qliphoth. And or as a husk, you don't grind up husks with your grains to make food. You get rid of the husk so that you can find the nutrients of the grain within, unless you're like me and can't eat grains. So that's the best way to think of Qliphoth, by the word that the Jewish mystics and rabbis used to describe it. I mean, and as we know today, the significance of those Jewish mystics and magicians is more significant than we ever realized. I only just today received my copy of Gal Sofer's amazing new academic book from Brill, which of course you have to sell a kidney to purchase. I found a secondhand copy for half price, only $100. And Dr. Angela Puka is just putting out a video breaking this down with really great visual aids. So shout out to Dr. Puka for doing the heavy lifting for a lot of us. But this text, for example, shows the Jewish origins of the Solomonic magic tradition centered around demon workings, shall we say. So the Qliphoth have often been sort of thought of apart from the Solomonic or Western magical systems, and something that entered late. But what Gal Sofer's work shows is perhaps one of the many things it shows is that we can place a much earlier understanding of the role of Qliphoth in the Western magical traditions than previously we could before. So that's a preliminary understanding. You want me to keep going? Let me say, there's so many interpretations of the Qliphoth, the Qliphoth, the Qliphoth, and I'm going to say the word in every possible pronunciation you can imagine, just so that no one feels excluded, because that would be bad.
I like that.
And if anyone wants to debate the correct way to spell the word, well, there's only one correct way to spell the word, and that's in Hebrew, Kof, Lamed, you know, I
Yeah.
think there's a yod in there. Or is there a yod? Yeah, yod, pay, uh, hey. So I should probably know how it's spelled in Hebrew, but that's okay. So Qliphoth, Qliphoth, Qlipha, whatever. One's plural, one's not. I address this like what I'm doing at the spring workshop is giving the first thing I became known for in the magical world was in the late 90s, early 2000s, for giving a workshop on a text I wrote in the Golden Dawn at the end of my outer order training, which I can't remember the original name, but I published it as Sacred Magic and the Qliphoth, and that's been my most successful little pamphlet or book that is sold on Amazon. It's dropped in sales during the pandemic because someone stole it and sold it on Scribd and made 15 grand, and my royalties dropped from 350 down to $20 a month. So I may sue Scribd at some point if I ever have the resources. I certainly have the evidence, and as a result, have been working on rewriting it entirely, updating it since the late 90s, where you can imagine my understanding of these things was a lot more limited. Plus, I was a teenager. So I started giving this workshop based on that text that I wrote as part of my Golden Dawn training from Practicus to Portal. And the workshop took forever. It was modeled on using as a hermeneutic St. John of the Cross's 7 deadly sins understanding found in his book, The Dark Night of the Soul. And that was sort of the modus by which we explored them theurgically. The workshop went over like a house on fire. It lasted 5 hours. By the end of the workshop, my classroom at the first temple I delivered it was full of adepts who were skipping out of their own duties just to listen in to what this little kid was saying, which was very flattering, of course, and it led to me being invited to temples around the world to give this workshop, and I was never allowed to not give this workshop every year there on out for the rest of my time in that order. And so I haven't given the workshop since then, but my understanding of the Qliphoth has changed since then, or not changed, but grown and developed and matured, especially as I became an adult and dealt with life and learned to go from knowledge or from information and knowledge to wisdom, you could say. And so I'm very excited for the second edition of that text. I have a new title for it, and then I'll discontinue the current version that is currently online. And I'll be giving that workshop for the first time ever in since 2003 down in Austin, Texas. Free for all members of the Arcane Research Society, and I'm going to try and fit it into 3 hours. So it's going to be an intense 3-hour morning of Qliphoth and theurgy and spirituality from me that day.
That's awesome. You mentioned that like your idea of it changed, I guess, as you're kind of learning it or practicing it or researching it, whatever, over time. How did you originally look at it, and like how do you see it today? Is it different?
I don't think the way I see it today is different. It's just I have a fuller understanding of today. Plus, I have the lived experience. When I wrote about it initially, I was looking at the role of that kind of spiritual struggle in the context also of St. John of the Cross's understanding of the spiritual journey. And in the Dark Night of the Soul, St. John of the Cross divides that journey into 2 parts. The Dark Night of the Senses, and then 10, 15 years later, or something like that, you might, if you're lucky, go through a really brutal experience called the Dark Night of the Spirit. Ironically, in the book, The Dark Night of the Soul, there is no experience called the Dark Night of the Soul. So, and as you might, surprisingly, that is actually a good thing, because it means that there's no need to get upset with someone when they say they went through a Dark Night of the Soul, because John of the Cross never talks about a Dark Night of the Soul. He talks about the Dark Night of the Senses and the Dark Night of the Spirit, and they're very specific things with specific signifiers. And so I did get to go through that Dark Night of the Spirit in my 30s. It was exactly as he described, and I didn't even understand I was going through it at the time, because to be able to go through it, you have to have been challenged by certain things in certain ways that would necessitate you not really being aware of what you're slipping into in life. Yeah. So that was interesting, and I have perspective on that now. And I have a sense of the reality of it. And that's, I think, very interesting and could be perhaps helpful to others. I shouldn't fail to mention also the fabulous work done by one of my modern living alchemical Kabbalistic heroes, which is the great David Heimsmith, and his book Black Ether, and his course on that is something that has also rounded out my understanding of these things and given me some new perspectives, especially since I also follow a monistic view of reality, which is, necessary in the Hermetic path. And he also follows that monistic view, which is not necessary in the Kabbalistic path. There's lots of Kabbalistic dualists out there, I think.
Let me just jump in there, Frater. I'm so glad that you
Yeah.
shouted out DCS. Shout out DCS.
Oh,
Everybody
my
go
man.
buy his
The boy.
new book, Two-Headed Arrow. It's very, very, very good. I would not say that DCS follows a monistic. He's very anti-theistic, or like
I'm not talking about theism.
Okay, he wouldn't describe himself as monistic, though. I wouldn't say that personally.
I mean, that he went on a whole tear about how that's his point of view. When the first time he was on my podcast, like that was the big thing he was pushing is there's one essential reality, not two.
Yeah, true.
He describes it in terms of non-emanationist, and that's a more accurate way to describe it. Non-emanationist. You're right that monistic can imply theism, so that's a very fair point. Thanks.
Oh, no problem. I just wanted
David
to, because
Heimsmith is a theist. Heaven forbid.
Well, no, it's because, Frater, this is the reason I clarified it for myself, is because I follow that non-theistic and a non-dualist model when it comes to Kabbalah in general. So I have a very similar, not exactly the same, but a very similar framework for mapping out the tree that David does. So that's why I said, because if I speak on the panel tonight, I wanted to be clear that I'm also not coming from like a theistic or monistic perspective. I'm coming from like a Buddhist, non-dualist, sort of like a post-Lurianic sort of DCS perspective. So that's all.
Yeah, the word theism, in my opinion, necessarily indicates dualism, because if you have theism, you must have dualism, because you're stating that there is a source or a being outside of something else, and that would necessitate a dualism. So yeah, I consider it we definitely share the same points of view on that for sure, and that is the Hermetic point of view as well.
Frater, when people like talk about the Qliphoth today, Qliphoth, whatever the fuck say this thing, do you think that like are they kind of misunderstood, or maybe not talking about the same thing originally was? You think there's a misunderstanding?
Absolutely. That's the biggest problem with it these days. And it stems from the fact that literally no one is reading the most significant core text on the Qliphoth. People are drawing what they know from it from the Zohar, which is totally fair, and from other bits of texts in teachings of different Kabbalistic schools. And that's the key. There's different Kabbalistic schools, and therefore the idea that there's one reality to the Qliphoth, or only one paradigm in which you can understand them, is absurd. Everyone's going to look at things in their own way. So you have people who are personifying them and treating them as demons of the Goetia, and working with them like that. You have people who are treating them left-hand path, people who are treating them like just gods there to work with theurgically in the same spiritual way you would work with any other deity like Osiris or Jesus or Zeus or Odin. And then they're like, oh, Thaumiel purified me. It's like, we are not talking about the same thing then. We're not on the same page. There is no conversation there possible between those 2 points of view. Other interpretations, I think there is room for some dialogue, but I think it's important to understand that we have such different paradigms of these things, and often people want to have this unified, find some unified meaning or reality to everything, and it just doesn't work that way, because again, we should have different paradigms and perspectives. So there's definitely a variety of many forms of Qliphoth. When I wrote Sacred Magic in the Qliphoth, it came out of a real occult struggle, right? It was definitely not the perspective. We weren't even allowed to use the names, speak them out loud, or ever show them to members of a lower grade in the Golden Dawn order I was in. And certainly we didn't see them as any form of aesthetics that a lot of armchair folks and diabolists like to see them as, this sort of creative aesthetic of like, oh, there's the chaos in the world. And I love dark music. I play dark music. I love that stuff. Prep, but that's not what I was dealing with them with. I was seeing them and understanding them as realities that cause evil, absolutely, that thwart us on our way to where we want to go. And so I like but I do write in the preface of my book. Here's a line I do write: sometimes we must transgress a little too far in order to learn what is the limit of safe spiritual progress up the mountain. And you can imagine that would be the idea of a 17-year-old in the grade of practicus, learning the Qliphothic names and trees and hierarchies for the first time, reading Kenneth Grant's Nightside of Eden, and as an Aquarius and, defining my experience of life through personal experience, obviously I was inclined to push the envelope a little bit, and it absolutely almost killed me. So for me, the Qliphoth are not just monstrous externals or sensational symbols. They reveal what is in us unpurified, misdirected, or spiritually asleep. And one of the central ideas in the book that I'll be challenging and reclarifying is that as the path gets real, the glamour starts to fade. So another thing I say in the book is sloth is the abandonment of spiritual and ritual work at this point, of which St. John of the Cross calls the dark night of the senses. And so you can see why I need to rewrite the book there. That sentence could be a bit better. But it is this idea. I look at the sins in relationship to the Qliphoth in a very different way than people usually understand the sins today, following from St. John. And so this is where the work really begins. And it's why I say in the book, work becomes true, invoking into the spirit only when the goal of pleasure is replaced by the impetus of devotion.
Thank you. That was like really well said. That I think you like actually answered like 3 questions I had at once.
Excellent.
Yeah.
The book is the best $20 you'll ever spend.
Nap it. $20.
Maybe it's less. Maybe it's 14 actually.
I was gonna say that's cheap compared to like what they're going for.
Well, I had to drop it below the price of people who had stolen it were selling it to compete with me.
Wow.
Yeah, I lost during the period in lockdown in which it was illegal to work for 2.5 years. I lost my #1 selling book and $15,000 of income over 3.5 years, gone. And yeah. Brutal. Absolutely
that's
brutal.
a very, very clear example of Qliphoth, right? Someone has the ability to create something, they go get something from someone else, interpret, get the flow away, and so on. So pretty.
Yeah, absolutely. What an excellent point. Oh my God, I didn't think of that. That is my Qliphoth book got Qliphothed by a Qliphoth.
Yeah,
Oh my God, that's amazing.
That's funny. Did anybody have any questions before I start going forward with the other ones?
I do have a quick question, if you don't mind,
Sure.
Frater. For those of us that are unfamiliar with the history of Qliphoth, can you share with us where the root of it and how it's developed throughout, I guess, society and ceremonial magic?
Yeah, so there are good writings and researchers on the Qliphoth. One of the things I didn't do, because I just didn't have the Hebrew skill at the time, was compile or study or research a history of interpretation of the Qliphoth, which is how something came into being and how it was interpreted throughout time in various ways. I wasn't able to do that because I had zero Hebrew other than the memorization of the alphabet, of course. By the time I finished my Master's of Divinity at UBC and had graduated from seminary, I had 2 years of Hebrew, grad school Hebrew under my belt and a year of Aramaic. So I was able to start digging into that stuff, but I didn't because I was busy with doctoral studies and playing music and things. So it's something I never did. I'll be point blank about that. But the Qliphoth does originate in the Zohar. I believe that is the first instance of them originating, and they were discussed in other rabbinic texts throughout from the Middle Ages onward. And I'm not sure the extent of which text they're discussed in. You would need to talk to a Jewish scholar to know the full extent. But I do know that the major text, the one and only major text on the Qliphoth, is something that no one reads other than me. I've translated the first several pages of it, but it was taking me so long to translate. I outsourced that to a Jewish professor and translator who I met through Marcelo Del Debbio's Brazilian podcast. This was the translator who worked with Marcelo, and so he put me and my friend, my magical working partner, in touch with him to have us to translate the book, and so we paid him a lot of money, and he strung us along for a year, then deleted his Telegram account, and Marcelo Del Debbio ignored all my messages, and so we got ripped off for a lot of money and never got the work translated. So you don't all have the Book of Horns, Sefer Karnaim, to enjoy and read at this point in time, because Marcelo Del Debbio and his buddy are thieves and scam artists.
Fuck.
Man, that's fucked up.
You had some bad luck.
And I have, of course, I have all the receipts, because we have the PayPal transaction, we have all the texts and all the message, we have everything. And I found the translator on Facebook now, just trucking along like nothing happened. And, well, I think the Qliphoth might have their way with him at some point, and it won't be because of me. It'll be his own evil actions.
Well, shit like that, you're feeding your own demons. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like Matt was saying. Sorry,
go on,
Go ahead. Sorry. No. I was gonna say, like you were saying, he's creating his own Qliphoths, the offender. So
absolutely, yeah. Actually, I was gonna grab the Book of Horns, the Sefer Karnaim, to show you guys how you can get a beautiful copy. Jews have wonderful binding services for all their books that make them available quite affordably. And I did look for my pages of translating the first part of that I painstakingly did and showed to a Israeli friend, just to make sure I wasn't, totally off my rocker. And so that was good, but I couldn't translate the whole thing, and I just don't have time. It would be great if someone did translate it. I might be willing to pay someone else to translate it, but you can imagine my reticence at this stage.
Yeah. I mean, it's very, very fucked up, because I watched this guy Marcelo's for a bit, and I was gonna say, like, one of his. I thought we were friends. I was gonna say one of his examples for the Qliphoth. It makes it like interesting. It's like an interesting point of view. Like for example, he always says, "Oh, imagine like you have HOD, right? So the ability to communicate." And then you can use that either for being a good communicator, spreading good information and whatever, or straight out lying, like being a politician and lying. So you're good at the sphere, but you're using it to in a bullshit manner, right? I wouldn't say that's the only way of seeing the Qliphoths, but it's like an interesting way. But now that you said about this history, I'm like, what the fuck? How can a guy, know all this stuff and do something like this? It's very weird, for sure.
Yeah, that is an example of the popular LHP. I don't want to use that term too lightly or designatedly. So it's a popular way of people seeing the Sphirot as good powers and the Qliphoth as bad powers, and you can use either of them agentically to do your will. That I think that's a huge error. I think that is a tremendous miscalculation, and also not true to what the Jewish mystics were trying to communicate to us, especially the rabbi who wrote the Sefer Karnaim, the Book of Horns, who was massacred along with his congregation in the Cossack raids in the 1700s in Poland. A horrific way to die for someone who wrote the book on the Qliphoth. They definitely have periods where, even in the Zohar, I think it's arguable that they see them as entities of some sort. But the essential, I prefer David Heimsmith's understanding of them, of course, and I prefer the traditional Jewish view of seeing them as husks around what is good, which are the spheres, the aspects of God. And in this way, it's very deceptive for people to look at the tree of life as the tree of life model. The intersecting rings, the rings going out from the center, like imagine the symbol of the sun or the monad, and then with circles between the point and the outer ring. That's an older view of the tree of life that I think is generally much more helpful for understanding Kabbalah most of the time. And so with the tree of life in the quote unquote Kircher diagram, though Kircher didn't create that diagram, he just printed it. Can you imagine a Jesuit actually creating a diagram of the tree of life? Not gonna happen. You see the Qliphoth as this inverse tree sometimes, and that is, again, I think, very deceptive. Seeing it more as that which prevents you from accessing the sphere, I think, is the best way to understand it. Certainly the most useful in my opinion. So Del Debbio's point of seeing, there's the Hod splendor sphere, and then there's the Qliphoth of the Hod, and I can use either of them, I think, is to fail to get the point of the Qliphoth, which is that if you're caught in the lying, you're not able to access the truth. If you're lying, it's because you can't access truth. It's because you didn't transmute that Qliphoth, that husk, that shell around the thing that it is of actual value. And so you weren't able to attain that. And that's your spiritual failing, or sin, as some people might look at it. Just like, here's another example. If you're walking down the street, because these things have to come into play in your life. Otherwise, if you can't understand them in your daily life, what's the point? How is that helpful? It's just metaphysical speculation at that point, and becomes extremely masturbatory very fast, which a lot of people also like, and more power to them. They can do that. But you see a person begging for change, right? And you reach into your pocket and you feel, there's just a bill there. There's no loonies or toonies, no dollars or $2 coins, just a $5 or 20. And you feel this resistance. Well, what is that? That is the shell around generosity, preventing you from exercising loving kindness and selflessness. And so that you're confronting, you have to wrestle and transmute that Qliphoth right there and then to penetrate it, throw it away as a husk, and reach in and feel that charity and just give what you intended to do, which was to give some money to the beggar on the street. Right. And I've been through this moment. I'm sure everyone has. Do you pull your hand back out empty, or do you let go, transmute that, and give them something because you were planning on it, because you wanted to? There's a theology of the Qliphoth right there.
That brings up another question I'd like to ask you. So basically, the way you compared the Qliphoth to the tree of life, if someone decides to work through the tree of life, you have to work through the Qliphoth. It goes without saying, or is...
Right. So that comes into the discussion of how do you work with the Qliphoth, right? They're there anyway. Working with the Sephirah is how you work with the Qliphoth. People who make it so that you have to confront the Qliphoth and then actualize them or reify them in some way, that's where I think you start to dig your grave.
I agree with that, actually, 100%. I think, and I agree with the premise of what you're asking, Judith, is that, that's how I see the tree too. Is like, it's non-dual. The tree of life and the tree of death are there. You confront the klipas. I have a slightly different way of understanding them, and I was going to actually ask Frater RC if he considered them, if he considered that you can clarify klipas, or that perhaps in the sort of way that they also are luminous or transparent. I know DCS has talked a little bit about this in relation to like non-dualism or qualified non-dualism, and how the klipas can be perceived as luminous in and of themselves, like a glass sheath, that is like the vessel that contains the spark of luminosity. So perhaps there's even no difference between the klipa and the Sephirah themselves. That's just one idea, but I'll let for Frater.
I think I think what you've just said shows the depth of contemplation and meditation and work you've done with this, and that I think I don't know if that's true or not, of course, right? But I think David Heimsmith would like what you're saying, and I certainly think that it does show some real experience with them. I would agree at face value with that assessment for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I consider myself a quite good speculative Kabbalist. I don't use Kabbalah for magic, just for the record. But I do consider myself quite good. And DCS also considers me pretty good too, just to shout myself out. But yeah, thank you so much for it, RC. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Oh, Judith, did you have anything else? Sorry, I didn't mean to. Wasn't sure if you were done.
I was going to ask a question, but it's more like how the tree of life is presented to the masses, basically. It's presented without the concept or without even any knowledge of the Qliphoth. And in your opinion, is that an injustice for those who would like to work with the tree of life?
That's actually a really good question. That's a really good question. That's something, I mean, maybe Jen and I can debate that a bit. There's definitely pros and cons to it. I mean, the fact is you can't work with a sphere without dealing with the shell around it, right? How, the sphere is the pearl or the oyster, if you like your oysters, or the grain, and the Qliphoth is that which is around it. So it's out of necessity that you have to encounter the Qliphoth. Why would you go through the trouble of reifying it anymore, or vibrating its name, or drawing, or focusing on sigils of it? I mean, I think Kenneth Grant's Nightside of Eden is fun, but I found it of limited value in its insights. Many of those insights I think are wonderful. That's why the subtitle of my book as it stands is, the Tunnels of Set, or Seven Deadly Sins and the Tunnels of Set in Kenneth. It's a long title anyway. But yeah, those ideas definitely helped me find my way to St. John of the Cross as a method of theurgy and working with them. And yeah, did I in the early days go a bit too far and maybe try some direct contact with these forces? Yeah. And it directly almost led to my very young death. And it took the intervention of the adepts around me at the temple down in LA to save my life from that error. So that's something I haven't talked about in the past, but I'm going to be talking about it now leading up to this workshop and the release of my second edition.
That was awesome. Just a question. I really don't know much about this topic. I mean, I know enough. But I was just wondering, like, if you use the Hermetic Kabbalah and like you kind of looked at the negative aspects of all the stuff that is associated, even maybe with planetary and the astrological stuff, do you think that maybe you'd somehow be kind of almost doing close to the same thing, but just not using those, I guess, names associated with those spheres and husks, as you call them?
Well, yeah, that would be the argument. Going to what the loon up there said. What's your name, the loon? What's the loon's name? Should I call you the loon?
You could call me the loon or Judith or Judy. That's fine.
I mean, Judy, yeah. Well, the loon is, I'm a Canadian, so we love our loons. It's one of our special. We call our dollar loonies because of how much the loon is held in high esteem by us, and what a cool animal as well, eh? But I think Jen would agree. That's one of the major arguments for a con. Well, if you externalize and treat these Qliphothic names as beings, doesn't that allow us to employ mechanisms such as those found and that originate in the rabbinic practices and created the Solomonic tradition for us to pull them into our triangle of manifestation and purify and control them through those external ritual practices? I mean, I think that's a strong argument for doing that. I am not convinced that it's safe or necessary. It seems to me, it seems unnecessary. There's a question one of my friends mentioned in the chat. Can I put it on the screen?
I had a couple of questions start. So I wasn't
Steve Mitchell, my buddy Steve Mitchell, he'll be at the workshop in June, I believe. He's a great Golden Dawn adept in a huge order. He says, what do I consider the key Qliphothic texts? Well, the original, I think, is the Zohar, but the key text is undebatable. It is the Book of Horns, the Sefer Karnaim.
Yeah, I had that and another one start, actually. I was going to go back to them. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Did anybody have anything else? Matt, were you trying to say something?
Exactly. I wanted to bring something up. Actually, we've been chatting on the Grey Lodge, I think, a couple of weeks ago, actually, since so long now. I was trying to find here, but I couldn't. But shout out to Solar, the other co-host we have. But he bring it up in he like named it. Let's say he tried naming it this kind of idea where you would have the Qliphoth, let's say the things that Frater is talking about, and then whatever other name you want to give to this other concept. But usually people will also call it like Qliphoth, whatever, which is kind of like emptying a symbol, right? I can give an example. Well, anytime you speak to an AI, right, you're going to speak something to the AI. The AI is just going to generate some text based on mathematics, and you are the one putting some kind of emotional backdrop, some meaning to that basically empty text, right? The AI is just giving you some gibberish, and you are trying to make sense of it. Or when you have some kind of, let's say you have a cartoon, a famous cartoon, and then for whatever reason, political or social reasons, that cartoon now means something else. Now, again, the symbol is emptied. You know, you had, I don't know, something that was supposed to bring happiness or whatever, you know, in the cartoon, and now people are just mad about it. So again, the symbol is emptied out of its meaning. And what do I think that's an interesting concept, and maybe not necessarily related to the Qliphoth, but people might conflate them, is that that is something that you can use practically. What do I mean by that? Let's say you have, I mean, you can work with the Tree of Life to try and rectify things, right, inside of you and so on. And sure, that's pretty good. Sometimes, though, it feels as if, let's say you have something you want to rectify in yourself, like a symbol or a situation or whatever. And the more that you try to go against it, the more that it becomes powerful. It's like you're kind of feeding it because you're trying to go against it, right? It's like this enemy that you're trying to go against it. And I speak this with personal experience. Once you understand that you can also just empty the thing of meaning and see, okay, maybe that's actually not, you know, not even as great. You know, it's kind of like you were seeing this shadow of a big monster, but then you look at it and it's like, oh, actually, it's like just something that doesn't even make sense. You can, again, kind of ground yourself and kind of make that lose power. So I need to understand from Frater if, first of all, if it makes sense, that idea of like not necessarily being the Qliphoth, but the concept that people may conflate. And if, again, since it's always also cool to understand practically how we can use things, how from your perspective, the understanding that Qliphoth can be something done in practice. Like you gave the example, you know, something compels you to do something, and then you either get blocked by the Qliphoth or you go forward. You know, like what maybe are other ways of going about just being aware and work around them, maybe if not with them.
Well, I just want to say that it's so funny that you brought that up, Matt, because I was honestly thinking of the exact. Oh, sorry, Matt. I think his mic. Sorry, Matt. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think your mic cut out.
I think he was good.
Okay. Anyways, so I know it was so funny that he brought that up because I was just thinking of Solar in that exact example. Like he said that we should yiddify Qlipa so we should say like the Qlipa with a K. I think that's what it was when we're talking about what Matt is talking about. But we should hermeticize the Qlipas with a Q when we're talking about the actual tree itself, the structural tree. So I think that's a great sort of like, if you want to distinguish it in that way, like Qlipas can just be husks, right? Like they can just be perceptual ideas that we have that are actually wrong. They don't actually have to be anything quote unquote evil or even things that obscure our view. And there's even an idea in non-Lurianic Kabbalah of the Nogal, or the kind of illuminating husk around certain Sephira. So, I mean, it's very view dependent. And like, I think Frater RC spoke on this before, that it is like, there is like a context to which that you can speak about it that will make sense to the way like your worldview frames the, like views the tree, but then there's like different ways to understand it. Like Frater was talking about St. John of the Cross and the sense aggregation. Well, we have the exact same idea in Tantric Buddhism, like the 5 sense aggregates and the 5 elements and the sort of 5 poisons of the mind. So all of those things actually are also klipas. We would call them skandhas. DCS thinks, but I said this before I even knew DCS, so I just want to, for the record, but I always said skandhas are klipas because the etymology is very similar. It means aggregation. It can also mean husk or shell. And so in Buddhism, what we want to do is rectify those things in our mind, because that's really where klipas are initially, at least. They might exist out externally, like as goetics or as things. I don't know but about that stuff, but I agree that you shouldn't worship. I don't worship the angels, and I definitely don't worship the Goesha, but I don't consider them different, really. I just think it's one, like it's just the hosts. It's how we understand them. And so I just maneuver the tree in that way without like assigning it to have gross spiritual forces, I would say. But yeah, great points, everybody.
Yeah, I don't think I've much ever heard of anyone worshiping angels or Qliphoth, although I'm sure some of the guys who've written the very popular Qliphoth books, many of which I think it's easy to consider dark fluff, as we say, but some of which have some real serious scholarship and experience behind them. There's a bit of both out there, that's for sure. Yeah, I would definitely never recommend people worshiping just part of the divine. Why worship just part when you can worship? Yeah. Well, yeah. As you mean as demons in the sense of the later term goetia as is used, because goetia means sorcery. It means, working with any spirit essentially is goetia, including working with angels, if we go by the popular definition.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm using the more contemporary left-hand.
Yeah, no, I get it.
I get it. Like, they're talking about like they're assigning directly one-to-one, like Lilith and the Qlipa of Yesod. They're saying that is identical, and I would say that no, it's conceptual. That's how I would approach it. That's all. Sorry, absolutely. So it was a semantic choice. I apologize.
For sure. No, I get it, and that's the biggest danger of viewing this tree of evil and the inverse tree as a separate thing to the tree of life, right? Because you're losing it's going beyond dualism at that point. You're going into full on, reified emanationism and thinking that you have to like progress from one step to the next to experience the fullness, or that you have to go to a certain dark place to experience a certain dark thing. It's not really true. We can experience anything anywhere all the time. In my experience, and that's my theoretical understanding as well.
Thank you.
Maybe I can see. I made some notes of examples of ways I look at it in my workshop and in my book, so I'll see if I can pull up some of those as exemplars as we continue to go along.
Sure. Did anybody have any other questions?
I did have a quick question.
Go for
it. As you compare it to being the dark, you mentioned earlier about people mistaking it for the left-hand path. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think people who are... Oh, okay. So, yeah, there's the idea of this left-hand path and right-hand path thing that's been imported to the West in the same destructive way that the West has often tried to export Western constructions into Eastern thought with very little success or value, and often destructive results to the original ideas, right? Like, for example, karma. What we've done with karma in the West is completely obliterated the original meanings, whether you take it as a social structure imposed by Brahmins or in the spiritual sense seen in the context of Dharma. Western views of that have led to all kinds of wacky spiritual ideas. and I think we all know what those are, so it doesn't need to be drawn out. But just so when we import these right hand left, why do people call people like me right hand path? It's not it's not a term we use, and so the same people that will label us right hand path or left hand path are the same people who are usually whining about cultural appropriation. It's like, so you're complaining about cultural appropriation, but you're imposing a term on me that I reject and saying it doesn't matter if I reject it, it's still true. Well, how does that work both ways? Would you like it if we started labeling you terms that you don't like and find repugnant? Would that elucidate more about the nature of you if we start imposing terms on you that don't have any place in your spiritual world? It's just not very helpful. And so in the path that I've followed my whole life, which is, got elements of Kabbalah in it, there's no right hand and left hand path. There's just the middle path of consciousness. The middle pillar is the pillar of consciousness created by the tension and polarity of Yachin and Boaz. And that's the path, right? Does it sometimes wind to and fro? Absolutely. But that's not how consciousness raises upward on the tree of life. That's why in grade structures like the Golden Dawn, our grade structure only goes straight up the tree. We don't actually have any grades on the right or left hand pillar. That's an illusion. And that's something that you find out only after getting to a certain point. So yes, I did just spoil that for a lot of people, but tough shit. Because this idea of going first to get sometimes to the right and then sometimes to the left, it's just not real. It's just not real. Certainly not in the Golden Dawn tradition, though it may have been reified in other traditions that were based on the Golden Dawn. And that, again, is not necessarily a bad thing. I think it depends how it's dealt with methodologically in the system of spiritual progression. So, yeah, left-hand path people want to do what they want to do with it, and that's fine. They're on their own path, which has nothing in common with what people like me are doing. So there's really no point comparing them, right? You don't compare the strength of a Olympic weightlifter to the strength of a downhill skier and see which one's a better athlete, because they're completely different sports.
Well, in defense of the LHP bros, of which I consider myself at least a little bit of one.
Please do defend them. Please do.
This is the thing, is that in Tantra, because it's Tantra, right? Like Tantra is sorcery. Like you were talking about Goetia, and like how that also means sorcery. Like Tantra is also sorcery, but it's a methodological sorcery that also affects your mind, but it's also for external and spiritual benefit. So it just resolves the 3-body problem. But I agree that it is that you should approach the tree from the middle path. This is something that Matt's heard me say like probably hundreds of times in the last 2.5 years since we've been doing the Grey Lodge. I always said, like, the way that at least we're going to do the show is that we're going to approach the tree from the middle path. But there's also an interesting tantric idea of the middle path as being a positionless position, meaning that you don't get caught in extremity. So very similar to what you're saying, Frater, but it is a little different because we can still draw from the polarities, but it's not the resolution of paradox or the sort of balancing of tensions is not necessarily found either in extremity. So like, I personally don't work with angels in the same way that I don't work with, I'm going to call them goetic spirits, with the acknowledgement that is a more contemporary idea, but I'm really talking about like the spirits of the lesser keys. So I personally don't work with any of those spirits because I'm obviously a tantric Buddhist. So I work with like the cosmology that we use. But I don't need to resolve like either the right hand shamanic, more like monastic, ascetic ideas with the more sorcerous ideas, because I also understand that I'm using magic, using sorcery to resolve those paradoxes in and of themselves. But it's also of my own mind. So what I'm saying is like, I don't think that a lot of those left-hand path ideas are wrong or bad. I actually think that they're very pragmatic and useful at times. I think what happens is they get twisted and then in popular culture, and they sort of get distillated down into a kind of, I'm a depressed goth edgelord. And like as someone who was like a depressed goth edgelord,
I know what you're saying, dude.
right? And so they treat it like it's gospel. They treat it like it's gospel. It's kind of like the anti-Christianity of, or the anti, like everything that is good, like the anti-cosmic. And like we have talked about, discussed many times, like Judith and I have this long running sort of dialogue about Mott on the show. And like, I believe in like the balancing of the polarities. So like, I personally don't see the point in being like completely, I don't reject the body and I don't reject the spirit. But I'm also like trying to resolve those things, that tension, body spirit tension in my own mind. So I'm not trying to deny anything or go so far into hedonism either. I'm very much like, we need to do what is like generative and reconciliatory, like in rectifiable. Like we go to Tiferet, we come back down to Yesod, we resolve the 4 elements or 5 elements in Tantra, and then we go back up. It's the dialectical relationship between the 5 and the 6. I'm obviously using 5 as not in the traditional Kabbalistic way, but I'm using 5 as in the Buddhist way, which is like primordial consciousness, primordial ground, where the 5 elements converge. But it refers to Yesod really. So that's what I think it is. I think that the left-hand path can be really generative and useful as conceptual ideas, but like with all conceptual knowledge that is not like true gnosis, you can utilize it, but then you have to also, like a husk, like a klipa, you also have to discard it. It's not useful to contain the fullness of an identity. Like you see this a lot on IG. You'll see people be like, left-hand path, anti-cosmic. I know I have a lot of them following me, and I like some of them. Like some of them are like cool people, cool mutuals, whatever. But then they'll have pronouns in their bio. Then they will have like political ideas in their bio. And I'm not saying that that's horrifying or whatever, but I'm just saying, like, why, if you are so edgelord, then why are you so stuck on identities? The more edgelord thing is to be like, okay, I'm going to let the identities go. I'm not going to position myself within a klipa, because that is what identities and those kinds of names are. They're just husks that we use to contain who we think we are. I don't know. This is an interesting idea.
I think that's very, very dead on insight. To quote one of my favorite Austrians, Christoph Waltz, that's a bingo.
Why does that sound familiar?
I've put what's it? Inglorious Bastards. I've put the link for people to buy their very own copy of the Book of Horns there in the chat. So go spend $29 for a beautifully crafted hardcover book, like most Jewish texts, and support your local rabbis through that purchase. Yay! And yeah, it's a book that I'm sure, as a result of me sharing it, the link there, and this chat will be now featured on many people's live streams and many grifters' private schools, where they tell you that just by having that book, you will either be cursed or have mighty power. So yay, I'm helping the Satanic Panic 2.0. Wonderful.
Oh God. But next week you'll be associated with the Process Church too.
Dear Lord, saints preserve us.
There's nothing wrong with process theology. Just let me say, I'm not trying to get you in trouble, Nick, but there really isn't.
No, you know what I was getting at.
I know exactly what you're
what's
talking
wrong
about.
with Paul Tillich?
There's nothing else. I was making an inside joke.
Do you have a Cardinal Electric Head? Do you have an issue with Alfred North Whitehead?
No, not at all, actually.
Yeah, we should. When I have you on my podcast, Jim, we got to talk about process theology. That's something I'm highly educated in.
Oh, yeah. I don't know that much about it. I'm just an
actually. I would have you on for that. If you know, I would love to have you on for that. Then I didn't know that was something you're into as well.
Yeah, talk about Paul Tillich. Paul Tillich was a very interesting 20th century theologian who brought Alfred North Whitehead's ideas into theological popularity, and it was definitely a major feature when I was in seminary.
Alfred White.
Paul Tillich. Yeah, Tillich. Wonderful theologian. I mean, do I think everything he says is the true theology? No, that's not the point of theology, but Does he have some really interesting ideas about God? Absolutely. Absolutely. Very appropriate, especially to his time and place, but very useful in a changing world because it takes account of change. I mean, people say that the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church says that they've never changed, and their theology necessitates that point of view, even though all evidence points to the contrary. So they could do with a little bit more process theology, which would just be them admitting like, yeah, we do change. But they're not allowed to say that because it would contradict their own doctrine. So the Catholics are fucked.
Well, we could just say everybody should go read Karl Jaspers on axialism. That's actually a really good introduction to process theology as like a sort of conceptual thing, because it's really not based in Western. It's not that it's not Western, and it's not that there isn't a place for it. It absolutely is, as Frater is saying. But the idea of axialism is actually much, much older, and probably actually converges with our idea of Kabbalah and where it even came from. And if you, like me, posit it as coming from Persia in the 2nd century, I'm not saying it was invented there. I'm saying it came out of the second exile period from Babylon. And it was probably something that the Zoroastrians were looking at, and the Jews were there, and the Manichaeans were there, and the Mandeans were there, and everybody's looking at this tree, which may or may not have been a tree. Like DCS talks a lot about this. Like there are Sufi ideas of the tree. I became a podcaster because I sort of stumbled upon what I think is a version of the tree, which is called the Mahavija grouping, which is a grouping of 10 goddesses, which Nick and I did 3 years ago on the show. We discussed how you can understand the 10 goddesses to mean the Sephra. And I did an 11-part series on it, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So yeah, I think there's many versions of the tree is what I'm trying to say. And I think that there's a sort of fundamental nature where I'm sorry, I totally forgot where I was going with that. But yeah, I agree with a lot of what you were saying, Frater. And like there is definitely a kind of convergence of ideas and then a sort of splitting of where the tree went. So I think that if you're looking at it from that perspective, you're saying like, okay, there's a Aristotelian dialectic of time, space, light, and dark. And this matches very, very well to sort of late stage Zoroastrianism, which is called Jurvanism, where they obviously assigned God the quality of time. But in the original Zoroastrian thinking, you're not supposed to assign God any quality, which is also interesting from a rabbinical perspective, because you're also not supposed to assign God any quality but Hesed. That's God's really only quality, is loving kindness.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I just thought it was an interesting point. Like maybe they were playing with this idea of axialism, the 4 quadrants, and seeing like, okay, well, we can turn, and like, so that obviously parallels Yod He Vav He as well, because you get like the king, the queen, the princess, and the prince. So you already have like a sort of swastika, sort of wheel turning idea.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, that's really what process theology is, in my opinion. It's like this axial system where the world tree or the world wheel is always turning. We're always in progress. We're always sort of in the process of becoming.
Yeah. So I wonder how much people are getting in the of what you're saying. This might help. The most simple definition of process theology for everyone in the Peanut Gallery. Thanks for being here. It's an honor and a privilege to be amongst such wonderful folks and all of you. But the simplest definition would be interpreting God in a way that changes and grows with the world. So God is in process just like the world's in process. And this is Paul Tillich's theology that he drew from Alfred North Whitehead's philosophy. So he adapted Whitehead's philosophical ideas into theological ones so they'd be useful for Christians in the 20th century. And someone in the chat actually pointed out the major critique of process theology, which is actually really good. Lucy rose up. Thanks for saying that. Well, I don't know if this is what they were intending to comment on, but they say it's been all cherry picking, aka changing as they go. That's exactly the critique of process theology. And when you study the stuff in theological colleges, they let you know all the criticisms of something as you go along. Of course, they're not meant to teach you what they think is true. They're meant to teach you how to think. That's what all schools should be teaching you, of course. And that is the criticism. Now, the response to that criticism is like, process theology may be done bad, is cherry picking, right? But what it's intended to do is allow you to accept and reject those things which allow you to know God better as time moves on. So in the past, certain things were necessary for us to know God better, but in the modern day, maybe some of those things don't help us know God anymore. And so they can be discarded in favor of other ideas or other foci along the way. So that's a basic idea of process theology. And yeah.
Sorry, Frater, that was
people.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a great summation of what I was trying to get towards using my sort of mythopoetic.
You said very
examples.
interesting things.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I appreciate.
I love
that,
hearing it. I love hearing it from an Eastern practitioner's point of view. It's so interesting because I don't know if you recall, I grew up in an Eastern tradition. I didn't grow up in Christianity at all, right? I grew up in a yoga Maharishi family cult environment, and that was really wonderful. Yeah, my parents were hardcore Maharishi people, and that was my whole world. I remember first hearing about Christian churches. I remember in kindergarten not being allowed to go back to play with friends who I met in kindergarten because at some point along the day, I asked when our meditation time was, and they looked at me like concerned, and I would describe what I was talking about, how my parents would do the yogic flying thing and bounce up and down, during their mantras when they were channeling their kundalini to the base of the spine, allowing them to shoot up and do their levitating. And, I'm sure the kindergartner's parents were horrified, and I didn't go back to their house again. And along the way, I found out about Christianity and was like, what is this newfangled thing everyone does but us?
Actually, Matt and I know someone who's really into the Maharishi stuff, so it's really interesting that you say that. Yeah, I mean, look, I just try and approach like Kabbalah. I'm using that as like a broad label to refer to the Qliphoth as well. But for me, I just approach it as a Buddhist, like as I am. I don't try and put my own preconceptions onto it. Now, because I'm in dialogue with DCS, I have had to sort of up my game, like you were talking about, like get a little better at the Hebrew, get a little better at the sort of like way that he describes it, because I'm much more of an experiential like Kabbalist. Like that's how I encountered the tree, was through experience, Sephirotic experience, like color and conceptual word. But they didn't appear like that to me necessarily. It was much more like through the lens of Tantra. So even how I approach the tree is interesting. So it is interesting to me that you picked that up. So thank you, Frater. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Let me give another example from my workshop and book so that people can understand my point of view. So one of the things that I think is important in the context that I'm approaching these things, which is through Kenneth Grant's Nightside of Eden and through the Golden Dawn Hermetic Kabbalah, if you like that term for it. I think it's a fine term. I mean, I don't know if there's much Hermetic about it other than the people who were doing that form of Christian Kabbalah happen to be Hermetic. But that's a debate for another time, eh? So like my central thesis is looking at the Qliphoth not just as spooky externals, but as mirrors of your own corruption. And when you do that, you of course have to realize that we see the Sphirot of the Tree of Life as macrocosmic and the paths as microcosmic. So from a certain point of view, we never experience the Sephirot at all. We only experience them through the paths that we walk. And the only connection between the spheres is the paths that we connect to them. And so Kenneth Grant makes this point actually really well. It's one of the things I really liked about Nightside of Eden back in the 90s and still like it today as I've been rereading it from a older and wiser point of view. And so Kenneth Grant points out that his tunnels of Set, as he calls them, are microcosmic and the spheres are macrocosmic, just like we see in the Tree of Life as it's understood in the Golden Dawn in the 19th century. And still today, those ideas are generally what's taught. So the book treats the tunnels of Set as inner realities that connect the evil Sephira or the Qliphoth to each other. So the only reason these dark things connect is because we connect them with our lives and actions, which is an interesting idea to keep in mind. Would they even exist without us? Probably not. And so when you look at this in terms of the 7 deadly sins, I look at sloth, which is not laziness, but it's spiritual abandonment when the sweetness of the work is gone. And I say in the book, sloth is the abandonment of spiritual work and ritual work at this point at which St. John of the Cross refers to in the Dark Night of the Sentences. And so the great work must be pursued past the stage of transcendental lust and astral inspirations to the saturnine point of aridity. And the real test isn't whether you practice when it feels magical, it's whether you keep going when it feels dry. These are all quotes from the book, which some of which I'll keep and some of which I will rewrite, rework, and turn into new and brilliant paragraphs. So, yeah, I essentially argue that devotion matters more than spiritual thrills. Probably won't be a shocker to anyone here. And another quote is, I say, work becomes true. Work becomes true, invoking into it the spirit only when the goal of pleasure is replaced by the impetus of devotion. So one of my main messages is that pleasure is not the measure of truth in spiritual work, of course. And that's just an example of my approach. And the, I think, important differentiation between subjective and objective realities in this particular interpretation of the tree of evil.
Thank you, man. Is there any questions before I went forward? So I wanted to kind of ask you some other stuff. I think we kind of like asked this, not asked, but I think we kind of answered it anyway, but it kind of makes sense with the question I have afterwards. Do you interpret the Qliphothic forces as actual entities, archetypal structures, psychological realities, some combination of these, or how do you look at them?
Yeah, I mean, I've answered that kind of, but not explicitly, I suppose. I mean, again, the cop-out, though, it does feel a bit of a cop-out to say people can deal with them however they want. But it depends on what you're working with them for and how that determines how you're working with them, right? If you're seeing them as things to be purified and transmuted, like David Heimsmith does, so that you can experience God more fully, though let's put a big double quotes on the word experience there, especially if you know David Heimsmith's work at all. So it does it, do I see, they're archetypal in the sense that we can conceive of them as archetypes. They're real beings in the sense that we do often as human beings and in the field of phenomena experience them phenomenologically, right? Like they might not be metaphysically, ontologically real, but we certainly have to deal with them in terms of ordinal phenomenology. In the layers of our experience of reality, they become real. So again, I don't know if I would put them in the same category as I would daimones, which we see as real entities or spirits. I don't know if I would. You can certainly turn them into entities through many different magical means, or just building them up in your mind to the point at which, you become possessed by that entity. If you focus on the Qliphoth of death and destruction, that could be several of them, so take your pick. And of course, there's tons more in the Book of Horns that we don't even know about in the non-Hebrew speaking world yet, because no one's translating it. That might change after this podcast, eh? Someone might be like, what the fuck? How did we miss this? It's like, well, because you don't pay attention, so that's okay. I mean, Dr. Sledge has talked about the Book of Horns tons, and no one's done anything about it. When I told him I paid someone to translate it, he just laughed. He was like, I was like, fuck you, just drink your absinthe and shut up. It's like, it would be interesting for us. To him, it wouldn't be of any interest because, he's an atheist. But it's just it would just be a wild, crazy demon text by a martyred rabbi. So yeah, we can deal with these things as entities, but I don't think it's healthy to reify them as such. What benefit is there to that? If you reify, so Kenneth Grant's point of view is like we experience the path demons and we connect the sphere demons by indulging in the path demons. What does that mean? That means living out those demonic forces. So if you reify a Qliphoth of death and destruction, that means you're destroying things. That means you're killing things. And then you are connected with that Qliphoth. You are possessed by that Qliphoth. You want to work with Thaumiel, great. You will divide yourself against yourself, which, you know, it happens whenever in psychology we have any experience of object identification at all, which is, like Jin was saying earlier, why it's so nuts how many people are hyper-focused on their identity these days, because what we know from psychology, one of the very few ideas that has not been overturned since Freud and Jung, because most of their ideas about how the mind and subconscious and shadow work, we know that's all nonsense now. But one of the main things psychologists seem to have continued to keep as true to this day is object identification. You identify with something, it fractures your psyche into that which you are and that which you identify with. And your identification can even be with a self-identity. And that causes a fracture and leads to schizoid psychosis if you keep going with it. And so, you know, users beware. Or as I say on the cover of the book, warning demons, you know, like however you want to see that, focusing on this stuff comes at risk. Just like focusing on anything disgusting and sick comes at risk. And you'll know that if you've explored the internet, it's darker corners for any amount of time. How do you sleep that night?
Well, the next question I have, I guess this would probably also depend on, I guess, which way you're looking at it or using it. What role do names, correspondences, seals, and ritual forms play in structuring contact with these forces or things? Or however you look at it.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I'm so glad you asked that question because that is the big one. That is in many ways one of the big questions. Well, Kenneth Grant did a lot of that, right? The gematria is the perfect example, like trying to understand the nature of the path demons in terms of their gematria. And guess what? That was one of the things I did focus on from taking his lead, because gematria is a useful tool. Anyone who thinks that it's some secret code to show how things really are is completely missed the point of it. It's a spiritual exercise, just like anything is, that helps you understand the map you're working with better, but not necessarily the terrain. Maybe it will help you gain insights or phenomenal glimpses of how these things play out in your life or reality. But yeah, the gematria is a great example of that. Looking at the names, looking at the numbers, seeing what they connect with, and seeing if an inspiration comes from your nous, from your higher self, that gives you some insight into how this Qliphoth works and how it can be better transmuted or dealt with when it manifests in your life. Because a lot of these things do, Qliphoth manifest physically in our lives through the bad things that we experience or heaven forbid do in the world. And that is very real. Let's see if I can give an example. Yeah, keep going. I'll just see if I have a good example from my notes.
Yeah, I want to read something from the chat, and I think it's funny, actually. I don't know exactly the context. I tried understanding here, but anyways, I'm just going to pull it up, and I think it's funny. The person said, or wrote it, again, don't know 100% the context, but they wrote, "No risk with Jesus." And I was thinking how, like, again, the concept that we were talking about, right, of the symbols being emptied, how that happens so often with exoteric things. So again, the outer temple things, where you're going to have the symbol that everyone kind of has their own idea of the thing. So at the end of the day, it's not really anything, because everyone has their different idea. For example, Jesus is one of those things, right? If you ask people to kind of speak about it, they will kind of gravitate towards some kind of thing, or the same with like Buddha or whatever, like the exoteric concepts, or even sometimes, again, Qliphoth, right? Everyone will kind of have their own very different thing if they just superficially study about it. So again, don't know their context, what they said, but there is indeed a lot of risk if you just want to get something packaged to you. You know, that's actually the greatest risk, I would say, because again, you're just getting something pre-made for you, and that comes with a lot of preconceptions, right? So, for example, if we are talking about Jesus, a lot of people will have the image of him suffering, with the crown and in blood and whatever, and then imagine you have that in your imagination all the time. What exactly is gonna, cause to you? Again, no shade on Jesus. You can use that symbol, Tiferet, however you want. Just if you get the prepackaged version, how exactly are you going to work with that? The always being in sacrifice, always being this and so on. So again, just thought it was very funny, the comment there. Again, don't know the context that they commented, but that came into my mind.
And it's interesting because that's such a feature of modern Christian theology, so process theology at work, because that would only be viewable, visible, conceivable in a world in which we have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. But early Christians had no belief in that, right? That's a modern idea, quote unquote modern. It goes back to Protestantism. But this idea that you have a direct personal relationship with Christ isn't found in original Christianity. So that really mitigates the risk of having, oh, I have my Jesus, you have your Jesus, we all have our own Jesuses. They didn't have that view originally in Christianity. It was all about the communal relationship with Christ. You come to Christ through your community. And so it's quite a modern problem, that one, of fragmenting interpretations individually in ways that then don't connect us to anyone except to our own mystical experience. And what good is that for human life if we're all just, trapped in our own solipsism? I have an example I found here in the text of my book, which I will elucidate, which is what, to the previous point of yours. So sigils, symbols, gematria, how does all that come into play with the Qliphoth? How is that useful? Well, here's a really simple example. So sloth is especially related as a vice to Sagittarius through the geomantic symbol acquisitio. So here's geomancy as a tool within this context. And you find it within the path or tunnel of Set, of the sigil of that demon of Saturn, Tantifaxat. And St. John of the Cross describes sloth as an opposite of the quality of Saturn. So that is, the initiate will dislike most spiritual pursuits because they are void of sweetness and incompatible with sensual pleasure. But the sigil acquisitio right there shows you how you could work with that. Well, you can make a sigil or a seal or a talisman or any number of rituals using acquisitio and the sigils derived from acquisitio, or even the archangel of Sagittarius, to then mitigate your own struggles with sloth. And sloth as it's defined in this context, not necessarily in the pop cultural one, but maybe you can use it that way too. I'm sure you can. So these things do guide us. Even Kenneth Grant's work does guide us to ritual and spiritual practices to help us mitigate against our own corruption or sin or whatever you want to call it.
Great.
Magic gives us lots of tools.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Magical tools, magical weapons. Anybody else have anything that they wanted to ask before you keep going or anything? All right. How do you personally hold that tension between metaphysical and psychological readings?
Well, shout out to Philosophical Minds in the chat. I'm not sure, what do you mean by a tension between psychological and metaphysical? Because metaphysical I see as, in the philosophical sense, is referring to the actual nature of reality. So we don't really experience anything metaphysical ever. We just experience our own, interpreted understanding of reality through the perception field, a little David Heimsmith way of phrasing that again, but through the phenomena we experience. And that has very little, as we know, to do with actual base reality, which is metaphysics.
Well, I'll just say this. I think Nick's question was really good, and I think that I agree with what you're saying, Frater. I think that there's a tension between what is even the word psychology even mean in like this context of like Kabbalah and like understanding the tree and understanding Klippas. Like you and I think would say consciousness. But I think Nick is drawing from more of the popular understanding of like psychology, as in like there is like I
Yeah.
mentioned, like there's the edgy goth version of the Klippas that are like you must be depressed. Like there are literally left-hand path texts on the Klippa that say like it's a path of depression. It's a path of self-sacrifice, like where you're like cutting and burning yourself. I'm not trying to be like Edgelord and saying this. I'm saying that they literally will kind of put that in as part of the hermeneutic to understand the dark side of the tree. And I'm not saying that it's like totally wrong because people have like I'm not saying that that's right. I'm saying that people run the range of emotions. So obviously those emotions can become klippas, but even good emotions can become klippas. And I love that you brought up the idea of perception, because I think Hesed, that is very Hasidic, right? Like that is, we are looking at the ocean and it's the reflection that we see off of it, and we see who we really are. And then we make a choice. Do we go to Bina or do we go back down to Hod? Well, that's a choice, right?
Yeah.
I just think that what Nick's really asking is like, how do we resolve this like mind body dialectical problem in how we, maybe even it's just a language issue, maybe it's just like how do we articulate it, like should we divorce like magical experiences or Sephirotic experiences, even if it's based on our perception? Should we take that away from like the psychological like transmutation, or is it all part of it, or is it like distinguishable?
Yeah, so sorry about that, Nick. Normally I would usually in these spaces interpret the word metaphysical in the way that you actually meant it. Because of the nature of our conversation today in terms of theology and philosophy, I just defaulted to the hard philosophical definition of the term to be, for clarity, what I thought, but I made a mistake there. I should have. Yeah, you meant it in terms of you meant metaphysical in terms of spiritual consciousness, the spiritual non-physical reality. Yeah. So that's a different question. Yeah, that is a different question. Thanks for.
Well, I even noticed the way you answered
it.
I saw the context and it made sense the way you're answering it anyway.
Yeah, no, but in terms of how does it? Let me think of it again. How does this play out when we contrast the spiritual, metaphysical reality of these things versus the psychological? And that's a good question. I'm not even sure that I have a fully formed answer to that. I definitely, obviously, there's the usual.
I thought that was actually
caveats that the psychological is. It's a great question. It's a great, yeah. I mean, the usual caveats like the spiritual, metaphysical view of the human incorporates necessarily the psychological. That's there. But yeah, how's it? I think metaphysically, as in the way you meant it, in the way you said it, the danger is you do end up creating these things into more than they should be. I just think that is the problem. You end up creating little kakodaimones, or little, what's the word for a little spirit you create? What's that word? I'm brain farting on it. You all know, homunculus. Yeah, it's like you're making little homunculi out of these Qliphoth, and it's like, again, if your path is to be a bedrotter and be depressed so that you can gain true spiritual enlightenment through the path of evil. Yeah, I know I'm sort of couching that, but that's okay.
No, that was good, because I was leading into something.
If you're going to do that, then I would recommend you go the Solomonic magic route and deal with them as spirits and demons as you would with any other demon or spirit. I don't really work those systems of magic much, but if you were to go do that, then do it, and do it in the way that the grimoires recommend, invoking from the highest and subjugating these forces within your life so they do not control you, so that you do not become a plaything of forces you cannot control, which is what chaos does. It's what dark forces do. They imbalance us, and the way to purify and transmute Qliphoth is through the what DCS would call the red and white drops, and through the heart. And that's a beautiful thing, because it makes you a better person, a more full person, and certainly more prepared to enthrone your nous, your holy daimon, your higher soul, and gain that higher consciousness, so that you can be initiated into that tunic of fire and become like a star god after death.
Thank you. That kind of leaded up to like one other question I just wanted to ask you. Do you think if somebody was to maybe get into this practice or this stuff, not really understanding it fully, or kind of maybe not being authentic with it, do you think that could end up kind of maybe feeding your ego and actually making things worse?
I think it almost always does. I mean, I just one foolish night, treated these things in a slightly haphazard, or as I saw it at the time, boldly experimental way, and it almost killed me. So, that was my experience. Maybe others are more able to navigate that kind of experience. I doubt it. I don't think that is, a healthy path. I mean, it's the result of us not getting very in-depth training on the Qliphoth in the Golden Dawn, which led to me writing the paper I led, and led to my workshops being as popular as they were, and that's why the whole internet started talking about me when I was such a young magician back in the late 90s. It's why I was known before I even knew I was known. And, people called me many things on the alt magic forums and all that stuff. None of them actually knew me, and I didn't participate in the online forums. I was busy finishing high school at the time. So, yeah.
I do want to. Oh, sorry, Nick. My apologies.
I just had, like, from my own experience. Again, I never really got specific with this stuff, but like at one point in my life, there was a few people that I knew were. And the idea of the Qliphoth from them, of how I looked at it then, due to their influence, and how I even see it now, is completely different. And I just remember that there was only a few people I knew personally that were all of a sudden, I can't even remember the book. Some book came out, and everybody seemed to be like pretty much buying the same book and getting it. And their lives weren't going too good. Seemed to get shittier and shittier. So I thought it was like a little weird. Like, I'm just wondering if that is like a side effect of like not actually really fully knowing what you're getting into.
I mean, even recently I watched a fellow magician and friend in Vancouver's life just completely spiral into utter self-destruction. And he swore that working with darker forces was part of his thelemic path, and next thing you know, he's threatening everyone and trying to blackmail people and extort them, and just complete mental breakdown. And I thought this was one of my like closest homies throughout the last 5 years. And it's like, yeah, well, you play with dark forces, and shit happens.
I had
Especially for people, I think, who look down before they look up.
I like that.
Yeah, and to be completely honest, people don't have to even be initiated to go that route. Like, again, we can use all the mystical names and so on, but people can just do shit, and you can see that clearly. Like, they digging their life down because they're doing whatever, lying or corrupting or whatever, and you see that it never pays out, literally. Like, the thing always goes downhill at some point. So again, there's no foundation.
We have so many examples, right? Like E.A. Quetting, all these guys, like so many examples of people from Crowley onward just destroying their lives I mean, Crowley, sure, he had some, there's good things about Crowley, but I think he could have been a lot happier person if he had believed in some of the tenets of Hermeticism that he learned in the Golden Dawn, rather than throw most of them out the window to explore darker realms and more selfish realms. I think that was his big mistake. And many people since him have followed his lead because he started his own religion and became a prophet of it. And a lot of people don't handle that well. There's great examples of people who did, like Lon Milo DuQuette, Richard Kaczynski. There's other lovely people who are represent that tradition very well. But there's the other side of it. And that's why in like traditions like the Hermetic spirituality, or as found in Rosicrucian currents, the Golden Dawn, and many other traditions, I mean, we just reject that stuff at the outset, out of hand. We even take vows against working it. So there's a reason for that.
I want to offer a defense of the Qliphos, but it's not
Please
really
do.
it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
an adversarial position to what Frater said. I just think, like, well, DCS would even say, like, within the Qliphos, there is the primordial space, empty space, which can arise wisdom, which can arise, the sort of female, the Shekinah, as he would call it. I would call it the Shakti, but he can call David can call it whatever he wants. But yeah, the female principle. Like we talked about this on a different episode. Like I think Matt and Judith and obviously Nick was there, and we talked about how like in a more tantric way, you would understand like the space even within the tunnel itself to still be able to contain the truth. Like the truth, the primordial truth is still there, but it's a perceptual case. So I don't disagree with people working the Nightside tree at all. I find Kenny G's work, shout out Solar. I find his work, he gets lost in the tunnels. There's no other way to describe it. He goes on to describe all the Qliphos like in immense detail, but he's kind of getting lost from what they actually are. And what they actually are is they're supposed to be experiential knowledge. You're supposed to be sort of performing the act of bringing Hokmah and Bina together, even down there. So if that's the Qliphothic version, then whatever the Qliphothic version of that is, and then you're creating death in that space. Because the way David sees it is the death doesn't exist on the tree. And I also agree with that. I think death is something that you synthesize in your own consciousness. So there is a use, but I do see a use in it. But I also see where people get stuck, just like people do get stuck on the Sephiro, and people do get stuck when they think, oh, angels are just inherently amazing. They're going to help me. They're going to manifest like the lottery. They're going to, it's very like, no shade to John Michael Greer, but he kind of went that route for like a good 2 decades. And he would be like all like it's all love and light, like it's all like you can't be stuck on that stuff either. That becomes a Qlipha if you grasp at it enough, in my opinion. So I just want to say that I do see a use in not only studying the Qlipha, but I think it is I don't think you should do it first. I think you should just approach the tree, like Maddo says, like very flexibly. Try and be, as I would say, non-dual. Try and be forge gnosis through the middle path, but the middle path does not mean centrism. It just means that you're non-reactive to the polarities, so you can reconcile them inside yourself, rather than, you don't have to. A lot of people love to do the archetypal play. Right? Like they love to go full on. So if like being left-hand path means like you wear a leather jacket and you wear like, black jeans and you listen to like death metal, that's what they'll take on the archetype in order to embody those characteristics. But I personally think that you should just be like, who are you? That's probably the fundamental question. Like, what is your Malkuth? That's what I would ask myself. And then I would traverse the tree accordingly, rather than trying to remake myself every single time I encounter a Qlipha or a Sephira. I would try and build the path as I go. But that is a very different approach. And I know that some people don't love that way because it's a little more Chokmah, it's a little more like what people would describe as droyon, or like crazy wisdom is how that word is often translated, although that doesn't really what it means. But yeah, even David would use that word to describe like how I approach a tree. It's very droyon. It's very like wisdom. It's not necessarily rooted so much textually. So I do think there's a use in studying it. I just think like people are doing it as, it's not a remediation of the tree. It's not like you don't go to the dark side because you were raised evangelical. Like you don't do it to get back at your daddy issues. It actually is going to make those so much worse. And just like the approaching the light side tree, that can make some of like what your perceptions, like not anyone here, but I'm saying like it can make you very egoic. It can make you very feel like you are virtuous, like you are very trad, very like, oh, I am righteous, like a crusader. That's a good archetype, sort of like, it's like a little overly Geveratic because you're sort of reaching for this. You're positioning yourself in a place of tension, because you're severe and you're kind of restrictive. So I do think that both trees present klipas. I don't think that the Nightside tree is inherently worse or like evil. I just think that it's all about how you approach it. And I think if you approach it more flexibly, conceptually, and you're willing to let it go, that's what it will serve you, because there will be ideas that you encounter that you will agree with, and that you will be like, okay, well, how will this further my understanding of the tree, rather than how will this allow me to do magic? Like I'm a speculative Kabbalist. I don't use it for magic. So that's just my perspective.
You just contemplate it in the exact way David Heimsmith thinks people should. So he might call you very Kabbalistic if we go with his definition. You've said so many great things. I don't know if I recall everything you said, but every response I had as you went along. But there's two main ones that really stand out. First of all, I generally really think you're on point there with that, and for a couple reasons. Firstly, let me say that that's exactly what you were saying at the start. Why I think the hermeneutic found in St. John of the Cross's spiritual exercises and interpretation is so effective with our understanding of the Qliphoth as a foil, as a method of theurgy, because he is not ignorant of the fact that what is often seen as good can easily become Qliphothic. That's invaluable, and my workshop will go into the details of that. But if anyone wants to prepare for my workshop or understand my second edition of the book coming out, go get David Heimsmith's Black Ether book. There's still a few copies available, I think, before it's sold out forever. But even better, take his course on transmuting the Qliphoth. It costs a couple bucks for sure, but it's 4 or 5 hours, I think. But it's brilliant. It's brilliant, and it complements very nicely other methods of working. It's not like, oh, this is a whole new way of understanding it that rejects whatever you're currently doing. Not at all. It'll help many people with their way of working. Not everyone, but it'll augment nicely to a lot of people's practices. And that's the great thing about David Heimsmith, is he has developed a system of spiritual alchemical Kabbalah that does fit in very well and complementary to most magicians' work, in my opinion. And that leads to the point of the Qliphoth themselves. Like you were saying, yes, of course they are there as part of the field of phenomena that we experience, and they are not some rejection of reality or some evil opponent to the one good. They are a part of reality. They are kakodaimones, if you like, right? Everything is slightly dirty outside of the monad, the one, the father, the good, or whatever you want to see it as. But that's just the words that the Hermetic pagans in Alexandria in the 3rd century saw it as. And so from their point of view, they would see these Qliphoth. If they were to hear what we were saying, they would say, oh, those are kakodaimonos. They're spirits that may exist only in our mind or our psychology or in the earth and the air, and they're dirtier than most because they are part of these processes that are often categorized as evil by human beings. However, the same as the Kakodaimones in the Enochian magic system, which are certain names done in reverse with a few other little things tacked on to make them function. And they are things that generate disease and cancers and illness and evil things in the world. But something has to be the agents of those forces, and that's what they are. And we understand God better because of them. So they're necessary, and they're not something to be seen or as to be rejected entirely, for sure. I agree with you entirely.
Yeah. I also wanted to bring an example, maybe real quick, of how doing something good can become a Qliphoth, right? Like imagine again, you have kids and you want the best for them, obviously, right? You imagine, okay, I want the best for my kids. So you work a lot, you get a lot of money, and then you think, okay, every time my kid needs money, I'll just give them money. Well, if you do this long enough, eventually this love of yours that you want them to succeed can actually nullify them, because they know, oh, always, dad and mom can hook me up and I can do whatever the fuck I want. So then you kind of are like creating this Qliphoth on them that they again, you're basically nullifying them. You're removing their active energy, let's say, even. So again, this is coming out of love, but you're breaking something. So it's very, and it's gonna be hard, right? Like again, you want to make it work, but at the same time, maybe there's a lot of crazy stuff. So that's why it's very interesting to study and practice all of this.
I'm so glad you said that. It actually gives me a chance to give a really good example of that. So, like you were saying, that the spoiling kids can lead to them being non-functional. I mean, in pop culture, they say that's the problem with Gen Z. They were helicopter parented or overly protected, and therefore they lost basic social skills and socialization and don't know how to talk to people. Like, that's what we hear in pop culture, and I don't know if that's not universally true, but it seems to be an issue. So good things can become bad. Good things can, like the money that a wealthy parent might constantly feed into their kid, prevents them from learning how to find value in work and labor and personal accomplishment. And if you rob a human being of the sense of personal accomplishment, well, you're actually changing their brain chemistry into something incredibly dysfunctional that will eradicate all kinds of opportunities for contentment in their lives. So one of the quotes in my book is really key. One of the key quotes that addresses that, right? Which is, holiness is not defined by how little we have sinned, but rather how much sin we have transformed and purified into virtue. So that spoiling parent creating a Qliphoth out of something intended to be good becomes a challenge that person then has to work through and transmute back into something good. How do you transmute being given endless opportunity and protections by a parent, wealthy or not, and so that you never have to actually struggle? Well, then you have to struggle with the opportunities there. You have to struggle with the wealth and money or riches or protection or favoritism you get as a Nepo baby or whatever, right? That becomes your Qliphoth to be purified so that you can get back to what life is actually all about, which is, well, I don't know what life's actually all about, but I have a few ideas. Thanksgiving. To get back to Thanksgiving, that is the Hermetic view of what life's all about. So, they can rob you of your ability to give thanks for existing if they just keep giving you everything you want and always pay your rent, and you never have to struggle to take care of yourself, which is the model by which we learn to take care of and show loving kindness and generosity to others. Hesed.
Exactly. And then it can even flip the thing where now they kind of expected there and expected more. So eventually it's like it becomes kind of a gluttony on, let's say, the kids or whatever, the person which is receiving. So again, it becomes the Qliphoth of Hesed, right? Because now it's the opposite. They want everything all the time. So it's, again, very interesting. But when you see it in real life being played.
I have an example from my life. I went to private school. I went to Waldorf school 13 years. So I was there without paying really. The school allowed a few kids each year whose parents couldn't afford it. And I was one of them. So I grew up surrounded by really spoiled millionaire kids. Hippie millionaires for the most part, but millionaires nonetheless, like in the most rich area of Canada, West Vancouver, North Vancouver, mainly West. But yeah, there was this one kid named Kyler. I won't say his last name, but his dad was rich as God, and he had everything he could ever want. And every time I noticed as we got older, and he was younger than me, so I didn't hang out with him a lot when I was younger, but you know, as you age up, you start to hang out with ages level out into early adulthood. And he would, like many of us would, you know, because you don't always have money when you're a kid or a teenager or a young adult even, you know, sometimes we would pay for each other. He would do this thing where he'd offer to pay, and then next time he saw you, he would hand you a letter with an invoice and terms for repayment. This kid had no need of anything in life, but his dad had taught them that the way that works is by basically being careful and watching your money. But that played out in terms of him being very miserly and not having the ability to do something nice for someone else for purely that reason. Because for him, money was this entity, this klipa, this shell that existed and had been reified as penny pinching. That's how you get rich. So he lost the ability to be capable of generosity. Yeah, I remember he handed me an invoice once when he paid for the first Star Wars movie when it came out. So we had just graduated high school, I'd say at that point. I think it was 2000 when that came out. And I just laughed at his face. I was like, "Hey, dude, don't offer to pay for someone, and then invoice them, like unless you're loaning them the money, like." And in the adult, like, if you loan someone money versus pay for something, that's two different things. We're all adults here. We all know what that looks like. We all understand how that plays out in social niceties. You're right. They're definitely different things. You don't offer to buy someone dinner and then send them a fucking invoice. Jeez. It was hilarious though, and I think he'd never seen a reaction in his life like mine. I just laughed in his face and threw it away in front of him, and he was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was experiencing.
Well, this is quite common among Heseds, like among Jewish Kabbalists, is that they will utilize contractual obligation, ahava, some people would call it, like the Tefillim cord. Like the actual physical cord of the Tefillim, they will use it to bind Sephardic ideas to these kind of contractual obligations, because ahava can be also understood as a contractual love, obligatory love. So this is a very common klipa that I've encountered since I've become a better Kabbalist, and since I started studying more seriously, is this exact thing. And I'm not saying it's just exclusive to them. I don't think it is. It's a very common klipa of Hesed, and it's how Hesed can go very wrong. Just like being overly generous is also a klipa of Hesed, and that can also go very wrong. It's I think it goes back to the point about not being an extremity. Yeah, it's amazing to be an extremely generous person, but also I think for me, maybe this will sound really solipsistic, and people can correct me if they think it is, but I think that you have to worry about your own Malkuth, number one. And it's not to the exclusion of other people or their lives, especially if you're entangled karmically or socially or romantically, whatever. But it's also making sure that that is tight, number one, and then you can see about Hesed. So for me, that's how I approach a tree, and perhaps this is what makes me slightly more left-hand path, or maybe even more left-hand path. But I'm okay with that. I can reconcile that to me, that you have to take care of yourself. This is something that I've only learned in my 30s, that you have to be your number one arbiter of your own. You have to be an agent of yourself, of your own quote unquote destiny or karma or fate or whatever it is. You cannot, it's not an over reliance on others. In terms of even the support structures that you may have, in terms of tension or crisis, those can also falter. So you have to make sure that your yesod, that your foundation is stable enough that you can even weather very adverse conditions. So I'm still working on it. I'm not saying this from like a, Clydesdale or anything like that. I'm definitely not. I'm just saying this is like my real experience with it, is that you have to be really careful with Hesed because it's so powerful. Like that capacity for giving, the capacity for generosity, the capacity for love, even romantic love. Like it can go really wrong. That's why we always talk about it for Grey Lodge. It's like so important that like Hesed, Gevra, Gebura, Gedula, Hesed, Dean connection. It has to be in synthesis. It has to be in synthesis. Otherwise, you're going to go way too far off into a klipa, in my opinion. That's just my opinion, but I agree. But I agree with what Frater is saying. Yeah.
Psychologists actually have a really good understanding, I think, of exactly what you're talking about, though, or maybe what you're talking about from another aspect, in terms of an overabundance of Hesed, of loving kindness, of generosity. So, and we see this in friendships, in relationships, especially romantic relationships, where one person is going too quickly and the other person's not there yet, right? It usually is destructive to the relationship, romantically especially, because the other person's just not there yet. So you got to use din and judgment, right, to balance Hesed with your own cognizance, so that you match the person. And psychologists have explained this now really well, of why overgiving to someone, for example, is an abuse of them, because you're pushing and forcing upon them the urge to elevate the relationship beyond where they're at. And that becomes an imposition that you're forcing upon them, whether romantically or just in friendship or even familial relationships, right? And I've struggled with that, so when you want to be generous, sometimes you want to be generous, or when others are generous or too generous, it can make you feel uncomfortable. And I think that's a really good psychological example of what you're talking about, actually. This is something well known, at least, so that's cool.
That's really interesting, that whole breakdown you just said right there.
Cheers.
Thank you. That made me start thinking. It's really.
I wonder if I have an example from the 7 deadly sins on that one. Maybe not, but let me give you a little. Because I prepared a little snippet from each of the. So when we look at, here's just another snippet from the workshop I'll be giving at InokiaCon in Austin at Arcane Research Society spring workshop, not at InokiaCon. But if you sign up for both, one, you get all of it. So avarice is not just material greed. It's, for example, like hoarding of teachings or secrets, systems, tools, and status. And the sin is found in those who are never really satisfied with the teachings they're giving. They're always seeking more, right? They're not able to balance what they have with what they want. And so this turns the true seeker into a greedy treasure hunter, collecting spells and grimoires, crystals, cards, and all of, grade ranks, for example. And that's what leads to this sort of spiritual consumerism that imbalances us with that particular Qliphoth on the astral triangle, right? We're talking Netzach and Hod, that balance there. So there's one sort of manifestation of that. Another one would be gluttony, which is the spiritual consumption for self-pleasure. And I say this energy is seen when the magician performs rituals repeatedly for self-pleasure, and their only pleasure being that what they themselves are inclined to do. Right? Oh, I like this, so I do this. We often will think that that's a good thing, but I suggest you ask yourself a tough and possibly nasty sort of question, which is, are you doing this ritual for transformation? Are you doing this spiritual practice to change yourself and to grow, or because you just like the feeling it gives you? Right? I think that's a perspective on it we don't usually see as we get further down the path.
bliss
Slightly
consciousness
non
can be
sequitur.
it's a good point, because bliss consciousness can be addictive in specific contexts. You see this a lot on Buddhist Twitter. Not to be like that person who references Twitter, but as a Buddhist who is on, like, has a big account that's on Twitter, I see this quite often. You'll have people talking about like jhana states or some of the other non-tantric ways to get to certain kinds of consciousness that we would describe in tantra, but they use like more, I guess it's more pared down secular methodology to get there. And you see them sort of like have realizations, but then it's because it's not concrete, it's not rooted anywhere. And so this is maybe an interesting point, is like they don't even have a conceptual framework. They don't even have a Qliphoth framework to contain what they're actually doing. So then after the experience, they just kind of get lost in it, and then they become addicted to that feeling, because they are hitting, maybe you could call it death or maybe gnosis or whatever you want to call it. Sure. But they're also hitting that like pleasurable bliss state, which is fine. And in a tantric way, we would know how to deal with that, because that is a big part of tantra, not sex. I'm just saying bliss consciousness. But I understand, like, I get it. Like, people do get addicted to things. I was even thinking gluttony when you were initially saying it, Frater, is like, I do think, though Hesed provides its own remedy, which is perhaps why it's often considered the most powerful Sephira, which is love has to exist in perception. Both people must recognize that they, like, whether we're talking familial, romantic, friendship, anything, like, both people must be in mutual agreement. That is the true ahava, in my opinion, is that you're in like a mutual relational agreement, that you are both friends or both in love or whatever it is, or that you're like you have an equilibrium, an equipoise, as like even in a familiar relationship. Like, you have to have some kind of balance. So
Yeah.
I think that's what Hesed actually can give, but it's a much deeper meaning than most people treat Hesed.
Yeah, since you mentioned that, I love that you mentioned that, because it ties right into my looking at the sin of Hesed, the deadly sin of Hesed, which I treat as envy. And so I present that as a fracturing of the self, not just jealousy of others. And so the shells of Hesed, or the shell of Hesed, the klipa of Hesed, use envy to break us in pieces within ourselves, and therefore to be envious, for example, of a fellow initiate who progresses apparently faster than we do, is just to be deluded, because we're all one, of course, and united ultimately in reality and in God. And so, envy then isn't just wanting what someone else has, it's actually losing contact with your own path.
I love that you said that, because it actually matches the Buddhist framework that I've given for Hesed on the show many times, is that I've always said I liken it to green Tara, blue-green Tara from Buddhism, because her remedy, the mental cliche, so the mental poison that she remedies, is actually envy, and elementally it fits. And as well, because Sanskrit sort of color theory and color magic, it describes, even though Hesed's usually described at the outer density as blue, which is, I agree with, is fine. But in like Buddhist color magic, blue is also always related to green. So there's always like a blue-green sort of turquoise element. And if you look at like what the Ramak was saying, like Rabbi Cordovero, he was talking about the turquoise quality of Hesed, the turquoise quality of God, which is really like water or like ice, which is actually really clear. And so it's really interesting, because there's the exact parallel in Buddhism, that like the sort of diamond thunder clarity, Rigpa, whatever you want to call it, primordial ground consciousness, that is also turquoise. So I don't know, which is also clear, is what I'm trying to say. But turquoise is considered blue-green. So there's a really interesting sort of like elemental association with Hesed being like the ocean, but there's also like the air, there's water vapor, which you could say is Hokmah. It's sort of like this interstitial, the supernal waters, I've heard it called many times. I've called it that myself. And like a sort of a tension in the waters below and the waters above that creates like a stable field of lightning. Like, that's a very Hesed way to sort of conceptualize the Sephira. So I agree with you. I think that's really interesting that you tied it to envy, because that's exactly how I would treat it as well.
Yeah, no, yeah, I love how in sync we are on so much here today. It's great. It's great, Jen. You're awesome, man. I would love to come back, of course, and do a Qliphoth part 2 with you guys.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
In a couple months before the spring workshop in Austin, which I hope everyone goes and signs up for at Arcane Research Society.com/2026, because it's going to be a good workshop. You can attend online or in person. And yeah, Jason Louv will be presenting, and Craig Williams, both guys who know a lot about the Qliphoth as well. And yeah, it'll hopefully be a very enlightening and purifying full day of workshops for everyone who attends.
Nice. Yeah, I look forward to that. I want to try to make that actually.
Oh yeah, you and I have to talk a lot. We've got a lot to talk about, so I'll Instagram you, and hopefully we can actually have a phone call and talk about, because we're doing all these events, and next year we're in Prague and doing events in Europe. So we need to start getting some pro footage to bang out some documentaries along the way.
That'd be wild. That was actually a place I want to go, Prague. That's wild.
Come with us.
Yeah, I have an excuse.
I have a whole proposal for you. So maybe after this we can maybe I can later tonight, if you're free, I can give you a ring.
All right, yeah. Sure. Did anybody else have any other questions? Because it's already after 2 hours. I just realized. So maybe we could wrap it up and do a part 2 in the future, like you said. I did have. If anybody doesn't have any questions, I do have one more that I thought maybe we could try to end it with. I guess kind of like after everything, like what is it really to you that you're actually working on or getting out of this?
What is this? My
This
spiritual life?
Yeah.
The word that keeps coming to me, seemingly from above, is fullness. And maybe that isn't the perfect word or a full description, but it sure does help me survive the brutality of this world. And as anyone who knows me knows, I've had a brutal recent few years, from COVID on, especially with the loss of my sister the other, like beyond brutal. And if you know the circumstances that led up to that, it's unimaginable. Obviously, there's always people who go through worse things, of course. But yeah, I think I would have died a long time ago without my spiritual path to, if not always keep me balanced, help me find my way back when I get lost. And then there's the fact that on the Hermetic path, you proceed so that you can also help guide others. That's an inherent part of Hermetic teachings and Hermetic spirituality, is that you are there to experience awakening so that you can then help guide others to that same fullness, which is the initiation into your higher consciousness, your nous, your which gives you access to everything, everywhere, and all of it, the wholeness of existence, according, again, to the ancient Egyptian and Greco-Egyptian Hermetica and those teachings. And that's what has lined up since I was young with my natural experience of the world as a meditating yoga kid, just inherently reaching out into nature and existence and saying, what the fuck? And listening to what came back to me from existence. And nothing has described that journey as clearly as the Hermetic writings have, and then the various traditions that grew out of it and developed tools and techniques and initiation systems to guide us along the way.
That was great. Thank you, man.
Another way of saying that is it helps me love others and myself better. And that's what better way to love God, right, than loving others and ourselves, because to not do that is to profane what we have been given by God or nature or reality, however you want to conceptualize it. Again, I tend to not think theistically, but, asterisk.
As DCS says, there's no problem with God. Like, I have no problem discussing it as God either, or as the tree. Like, I've said this many times, like on recording, no problem. There's no problem to like say God, or like I would say like Shiva, or like Shiva consciousness, or whatever framework you want to use. I have no problem. I think it's fine. I think it depends on your audience. So I wasn't trying to be overly corrective before, Frater. I just wanted to make sure that, like if I said something, it wasn't going to be in contradiction to like the framework that you laid out.
Yeah, of course. No, I get it. Yeah, my whole main academic book, my master's thesis, is right up your alley, Jin. It's a apophatic, non-metaphysical, anti-ontotheological approach to the ethics of understanding God, and you can get that book online. It's called The Ethics of Understanding God, but God's got a line through it.
Nice.
Which in philosophy is called Speaking Under Erasure, believe it or not. So you draw a line through a word if you want to eradicate the metaphysical underpinnings of it to open it up to new possible meanings. And that's Jacques Derrida.
It's very breaking the klipa, because words can be
klipas
in and of themselves.
See, you see where I'm going with that, brother? Yeah, baby.
I like that. Very well.
This has been such a treat. Thank you so much for having me on today. I'm happy to stick around a bit longer, but I just really appreciate it, because I'm excited to return to this topic and to bring, 45 years of experience to it that I did not have when I first wrote about such a major theme. And I also want to add, I definitely know I wouldn't have gotten into the trouble I got into when I messed around with the Qliphoth in the grade of Practicus. Had I been an adept, I would have had tools and initiations that allowed me to not have any problems with that. So again, from experience, I will say it can also be a cautionary tale of just, don't leap before you look. Listen to the wisdom of others, because you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you just need to get to a better, like if someone had told me it's not about hiding dark secret knowledge and power from you, it's just about making sure you are stable and grounded and full enough as a human being to be able to confront those things, I probably would have not fucked around and found out. But I did find out. I wrote a book on it, and now I'm rewriting that book with almost 3 decades of new experience and seeing it play out even more. Oh my God. But again, I'll save that for the book and the workshop.
There you go. No, thank you, man. I love getting you on the show, so it's always a pleasure for us.
It's an honor.
Thanks. Before we wrap it up, let everybody real quick, just remind everybody where they can find that stuff. Judith DeLune, what is going on?
Thank you again for having me. It's great to see you, Jen and Matt, and always a pleasure, Frater RC. And everyone else, you could find me on YouTube and on X as DeLune, and you could find my podcast on Spreaker.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. And Jen, the ninja, what is up?
What is up, Cardinal? Thank you so much for having me on. I know it's been a minute, but it's I was on sporadically last month, so it wasn't like a long hiatus. And I just needed a little quick minute to like get myself together, as the kids say. And sometimes it's good to be a little withdrawn and just like think about like how you want to proceed, like path work. So that's all. Maybe I'm just taking that moment to do that. So. But yeah, Threshold Saints were rocking and rolling over on the feed. I'm so glad that Judith set up her feed. I saw that she made that post, so everybody should check that out. Of course, check out Matt's work, his website, all his like Enter Gamu, and of course our stuff on the Grey Lodge. I would say thank you to all the Substack subscribers. It's increased my show's reach by like 1,000 listeners per episode. So wow. ThresholdSaints.substack.com. That's the best place. But of course, Apple and Spotify, Ike Baker's episode, which is called Metacognition, will be out. Probably Saturday. I'll probably finish it on Saturday. It's edited, but I have to put like my little, remix on it. So yeah, everybody can check that out. Of course, there's like the 3-part episodes with Sochki, and then the new episode with BD. Those were just released in the last 4 days. So there's plenty, and there's plenty more coming. And Nick's going to be Mr. 93. So it's coming up really soon. So yeah, everybody can check that out. And of course, you can listen to me and DCS hash it out with my like non-dual Kabbalah on episode 91, Code of the Lightning Flash. So if people are interested in that. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Everybody, Judith, Matt, Frater RC, and of course, Nick.
Oh, thank you. I was really happy you made this topic. I know we've been talking about it for probably like a year and a half. So finally made it happen. Matt Moore, what is going on, bud? Thank you very much for making it as well.
Thank you. Very happy to be here. Very happy to be in this conversation. Thanks, Frater. Thanks, Judith, Jin, and Mr. 93. I always laugh when Jin says that, man. So nice. Anyways, you can always find me as at MattMoore19. That's going to be on YouTube, X, TikTok, Instagram, maybe some other place. And like Jin said, there's the project entergamu.com, where, again, always a lot of cool stuff going on there. For now, it's behind an invite code. So if you want to join, just DM me and I'll hook you up. And there's also the Kabbalah library. So that's Kaabalah. You can use, if you use Claude, for example, as your AI, you can ask it to use this library, and you can do like any astro calculation or numerology or gematria or whatever. A lot of calculations there. Also correspondences. So if you want to see, obviously, I mean, I'm putting the correspondences that I want to put there, but the thing is open source as well. So if you want to put more, feel free. But yeah, you can see correspondences to the spheres, the paths, from musical notes to Western astrology signs and whatever. You can do all sorts of crazy things there. I'm trying to always add more features. Anyways, if you're curious, just DM me and I'll hook you up on that as well. Thanks again, everyone.
Oh yeah, no, thank you, man. And Frater RC, please again let everybody know where they can find all of your stuff before it gets taken down or shadow banned.
HERMETICpodcast.com. Check out my Hermetic Mystery School, join my free cyber guild, join my YouTube, Patreon, or website. But most importantly, go to arcaneresearchsociety.com/2026 or enochiacon.com, takes you to the same page, and check out the events we're doing this year. And before I go, I'd love to actually know where all you are in the world, because I don't think you're all in America, are you?
No. I'm in North Carolina.
North Carolina, in Ike country.
Yeah, about 6 hours.
Did you see my April Fool's video?
No.
Oh, I put out a video called it's just a short video called Simple Mage for April Fool's, and it starts out with it's a song that starts out with the line with the phrase Ike Baker taught me when I was blah, blah. I rewrote the words to Simple Man to be Simple Mage about Ike Baker.
Nice.
And I play it on guitar. Yeah, a couple of verses. Awesome. We'll write the rest of the verses and perform it at EnochiaCon with Icon drums. But yeah, check out 2 verses of Simple Mage. Because be a simple kind of mage. Be balanced without rage.
Oh God, I gotta check this out. Nice.
Where are you, Matt? Sorry?
I didn't know you played the guitar.
I was a full-time professional musician for almost 20 years. Yeah, up until psoriasis destroyed my hands. I'm now on the lion diet, and it is starting to slowly recover by just eating ruminant meat and nothing else.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I play a dozen instruments. I have a new 7-inch vinyl coming out this summer with 2 new songs. The Ballad of Bridget and the Ballad of Lou, which are spell songs that I wrote in ritual and recorded with one partner, my buddy. I did all the instruments on them: bouzouki, guitar, flutes, whistles, bagpipes, and some other things. And then my buddy did keys, and he just won a Juno for playing keys. His name's Justin Hagberg, and his main band, he tours with his 3 Inches of Blood. So we're doing a whole album of songs based on the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Tuatha Dé Danann of the Irish gods. Yeah.
Very interesting.
nice.
Yeah, I was a folk star, folk rock and roller for a very long time, and always wanted to get back to teaching and magic, but then I guess I didn't do it soon enough, and nature and my physical body forced me to by robbing me of the use of my hands.
Oof, that's rough. Matt, I don't know if I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm kind of a bohemian right now. So I'm in Brazil, but I'm gonna be in Austin next month. Then back to Europe again. Then probably somewhere else and whatever. Like just free
Are you
around.
Brazilian originally, or were you born?
Yeah.
You see. Wow, very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I'd love to get to Brazil. My friends always send me pictures. Of course, there's also a Jewish professor there who owes me some money. So if you know any affordable bounty hunters.
Man, I'm very curious about that.
One reason I was sure he wouldn't rip me off was because life is so cheap in those countries. Like, why would you rip someone off when you live in a country where your life is worth $50? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't want to spell it out because we're on YouTube, but that's what your life's worth in a lot of countries. $50 is what it costs. Maybe $100 if they use a more significant tool, shall we say? Again, I don't want to use certain words on this platform, but like, I was like, no, he's not gonna screw me over because it would take Anyway, I'm not that kind of person, of course, and so he's lucky. People take advantage of us right-hand path people because they know we aren't going to do harm to others. But
yeah, they'll come back to him. Yeah. Oh yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to do? Was there anything else you wanted to promote or anything? Oh wait, or was he? That's right. You also asked where everybody was from.
Jin, are you in China or Japan or someplace like that?
No, I'm Canadian.
Oh right, I knew that. I knew that. We went over that.
It was actually funny when you were talking about it because I was a West Van kid and I always wanted to actually live in North Van because because you can live in the forest amongst the trees and
dude, I grew up in Lynn Valley.
But I also have lived in Asia and I've also lived in the US and also Toronto. Wow. So I've kind of that's
crazy.
I've lived all over. And so in my post-COVID life, I was just like, I'm gonna, live my quiet we'll call it like gentry LARP, like where I pretend to be like a gentleman farmer. So that's basically what I do now because not what I do, but it's like part of like what I sort of manifested for myself, we'll call it, post-COVID.
That's incredible. So you're from the same town as me, basically. Well, West Van is where my mom grew up. There on Marine Drive, they had a big place. So
wow.
you know what that means. I grew up in Lynn Valley. Right near Frater Achad's grave is where I grew up, and doing ritual work at his grave as a teenager.
Well, we talked about this a little.
When did you leave Vancouver? Are you there? Are you here now?
No, my sister still lives in Vancouver and my grandparents too.
Great. Well, you have to hit me up next time you're in town.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I just don't tell anyone. I'll go to Vancouver for 3 or 4 days and I'll like come back and just be like,
well, tell me next time.
Never left. But sure, we'll try and make it happen the next time I'm there.
Cool.
And yeah, no, I mean, I did like a whole, like we did with the Grey Lodge. So Matt and like the other guy that we shouted out, Solar, and obviously Joshua, who's also part of the Grey Lodge. We did a whole like 11-part series called Aeon of the Daughter. I didn't know Frater Achad's work. Like I really didn't. I was kind of like a bit of a artard on it, but yeah, I mean, it's been like sort of my whole project. Like if I quit podcasting tomorrow, I'll be like, okay about it because we did that. We kind of like brought back the Aeon of the Daughter working in like a chaos magic kind of left-hand path, but we kind of did it like rock and roll style on the internet. So
rock and roll style, I like that.
That's awesome. And where do you live today?
I live on the coast. I live in Canada.
Oh, you're still in BC?
No, I don't live in BC.
Oh, you live on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that might be where I'm heading with the cost of rent and homes these days.
Pretty expensive here now.
I have my eye on a few places, so I'll let you know what I'm thinking.
Sure.
Cool.
That
East
was
Coast
the
is
most
great.
gin lore I've ever dropped on this show.
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
I respect
I've
your
ever
privacy.
talked about myself. So
You're a mysterious man, a man of mystery. I love it. I love it.
He's a ninja.
Well, so like I grew up in the 90s training in Bujinkan in West Van at the foot of Grouse Mountain in the playgrounds of schools there. That's where we did our training, just outside on the cement, in the grass, and on the hillsides and all of that. So that's what I was doing ninja training while you were probably there, growing up as a ninja yourself, at least in spirit. I'm not sure what your martial arts background is, but
well,
that's
I mean,
pretty cool, man.
I told Nick this, that my dad, he's ethnic Chinese, obviously, but from the Indonesia. So yeah, we grew up fighting, like learning Silat, and also my dad knows Wing Chun, but it's like street style kind of Wing Chun, like very like the kids would like mimic other people or mimic films, but it is kind of real too. So yeah, my dad's really tough. He's like a, like if you ever seen The Raid, like that's my dad, but just like in his 60s. So
very cool.
Yeah, my dad's like a tough guy, so he made sure that my sister and I could fight and all that stuff.
That's so awesome.
Not
man.
ninjas.
We probably know people in common from the North Shore, man.
Maybe. I mean, most of my friends were from Hong Kong, so maybe I don't know how cool you are with those people. But
I was dating a Chinese Hong Kong born fiddler for a lot of those years that you were probably around, and she was from there as well. So yeah, I mean, that's the Vancouver way, right?
True Hapaboria.
Man, that's wild. That's wild.
Fantastic. Awesome.
It's bugged out. Yeah. All right.
You guys just get cooler and cooler.
Yeah, see, that's what happens. That's why we keep on having you on too. Thank you very much, man. That was a lot.
My pleasure. I came prepared.
No, you definitely did. You definitely did. Well, after I realized how much work you put into it, when you told me last time, I was like, oh fuck, definitely got to get you on, So yeah, me and Jen had talked about trying to do the topic, and I was just like, it's kind of a heavy thing to talk on. And once you had mentioned something, I was like, well, fuck it, I'll just have you on.
I think this
was a better choice.
Done a very good job. I think the collaboration was a very effective way of dealing with this, especially with Jen's points, but with everyone here teasing out the ideas so that people could so everyone in the audience could really get a sense of broad perspectives, that they can give them more avenues and inroads to the topic without feeling sort of gang rushed into popular avenues of approach and methodologies that can often be sensationalized and dangerous if you really take them the wrong way.
I agree. Totally agree. And thank you very much. That's what we're trying to do here, I think. So, all right. Thank you very much again. Is there anything that you wanted to promote your YouTube and stuff again? Is there anything that you left out?
Frater RC on YouTube. Come subscribe. And if you can't support by becoming a member, the new algorithm on YouTube disproportionately favors likes. So if you like your favorite creators' videos or just go through a bunch of their videos and like them, it has a massively disproportionate effect for us on YouTube these days. You can literally change someone's life by just liking their videos. It's crazy. So go like and subscribe if you want, but definitely do the liking, because you really can change the game for someone.
That is very true. Like, subscribe, comment if you want. Definitely. All that stuff actually helps, I think, with the algorithm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, we'll definitely get you back on for a part 2. I'm sure there's plenty. Actually, there was a lot of questions I didn't even ask. So maybe we could have another one. And thank you all again for coming on. It was a little bit longer than I expected, but I think it was awesome. Not better than I could even have ever imagined. And thank you, everybody in the chat. There's a lot of people here. It looked like from the beginning to the end. That's what's up. That's awesome. That's definitely putting in some work. I appreciate it. That's why we go live. And until the next one, everybody be well. A little later.